Good day, sisters and brothers. First and foremost, my regrets at not being able to be physically with you today at Bahia. I had so much looked forward to being there at the World Social Forum for Health and Social Security and for the duration of the forum as a whole. But unfortunately, due to administrative visa process in the consulate of the Brazil, that has not been possible. So I would make interventions on the two topics I'll be speaking to via this means, this video, and we'll be ready for questions by telephone in the course of the discussions. The first of the two issues has to do with the international trade union movement as a space for building democratic alternatives for development and ways to dialogue with the objectives of the SDGs. Before going into this, let me quickly introduce the Public Services International, the PSI. It is 111 years old, the Global Trade Union Federation for women and men delivering much needed public services, over 20 million of members across over 700 affiliates in 154 countries and territories. It fits squarely into this particular topic of discussion because it reflects a development which is the international trade union movement with roots in the 19th century. And to understand the international trade union movement as the space we are talking about, we have to look at the context of the emergence of the international trade union movement, which was a response to the exploitative relations that came with modern industrial society's emergence, where it is difficult today for many people to imagine that some 150 years back, people were working for upwards of 16 hours, including children and women. There was poor sanitary conditions, and there was more or less a master-slave relationship between the bosses and the workers, and the communities were wretched, and so on and so forth. And the fact of the matter is that it took coming together, the solidarity of working class people to be able to curtail the excesses, the unilateral power of the bosses. And this is essentially what is at the core of the international trade union movement as a space for redefining development, because development initially and even to a great extent now is perceived by the bosses as growth and a better life for just a few people. This is even reflected from what Oxfam recently showed of less than a dozen people having as much wealth as half of the entire people in the globe. It is the international trade union movement that, as a space, expanded the democratic space for the poor, the oppressed, the exploited worldwide. And this is by building on workers' power and leveraging on this to build on democracy, to establish democracy from below. Even some things taken for granted today, like the right to the franchise for people to vote. These were things that were denied, which only a few very rich people had, even including women not winning the franchise until barely 100 years back. So the SDGs can be seen within this perspective 100 years after the emergence of the PSI and well over 100 years after the international trade union movement emerged as somewhat a response to this democracy from below pressures of working class people for a better life for all. And we can see from this that solidarity is of the essence, and presentation of alternatives, because what we have in terms of the reforms that have made life a bit reasonably better for a significant proportion, despite the fact that the bulk of people in the world still live in poverty, are actually concessions given as a result of the struggles, our collective struggles. So what the international trade union movement does is to bring the collective struggles, generalize the lessons and experiences in different parts of the world, stand together with each other against not only the exploitation of local bosses, but especially as you have the internationalization of capital with expansions of multinational corporations, with expansion of international trade along re-regulation of free trade, is to ensure that these are curtailed. Now, in relation to the SDGs, this also is about alternatives that we as the trade union movement presents for social justice, for decent work against poverty, and for gender equity, and so on and so forth. So it is important to situate properly what we have in the form of the SDGs as not just some benevolence, but what amount to reforms, concessions to our struggles as working class people and youth from below. That is the significance of the space that the International Trade Union Movement, which includes the Public Services International, represents for us at this hour in the history of humankind. To save humankind, and the planet from the ravages of neoliberalism, to put people over profit as against what subsists now, where profit is the mammon which governs governments and which is driven by big business. Thank you very much.